All right. Carolyn Bruey is a licensed psychologist, certified school psychologist, and a board certified behavioral analysis with more than 35 years of experience working with children and adults with autism spectrum disorders, their families, and provider agencies. She has published multiple chapters and books relevant to diagnosing and supporting individuals with autism spectrum disorders. After over 25 years of providing psychological services within her private practice, she joined the Lancaster Lebanon Intermediate Unit 13 in 2005. She is currently the program supervisor for Autism Solutions, which is a family-focused service provider that provides a variety of psychological services suspected of autism spectrum disorders. And with all that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bruey. You're on mute.
There we go. It's a mouthful. Sorry for all that verbiage there. I'm really excited. I know a lot of you, if not all of you, were here last week. Let me ask you this. Was anybody that's on the meeting now not here last week? Couple? Okay. Because what we're going to be talking about tonight is how to teach coping strategies to children and adults on the autism spectrum. And one of the examples is cognitive behavior interventions, which is what we spent all last Thursday talking about. So what I did is I deliberately made that section the very end of tonight, so that in case we started getting low on time, worst case scenario is Lakin videotaped my presentation last week. So that'll allow you to go into a deep dive with that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. And a couple of things to say that we did last week. I want to make sure we emphasize this time too, because it's a relatively, a larger group. What we're asking is that people sort of hold off with questions and comments, but I'm, hopefully going to have time for that at the end for people to jump in. So if you write something in the chat box, I won't be able to read it. That said, Lakin's going to keep tabs on the chat box. So if anything's written in there that really can't wait, she's going to jump in and let me know, especially if when I show the videos, if you can't hear them or whatever, she'll let me know right away. Just unmute yourself and let me know. Okay. Okay, then we are good to go. I'm going to bring up my PowerPoints. Okay. All right, oops. Can everybody see the PowerPoints all right? We're good? Okay. So as I said, we're going to talk tonight about teaching coping skills to children and adults with autism spectrum disorders. So let's get rolling. First thing I wanted to emphasize with you all is the fact that there are lots of reasons why children and adults with autism spectrum disorder tend to have difficulty in terms of staying calm and difficulty in terms of coping skills. One is that they tend to misinterpret social situations. And those of you that are all on this conference tonight know that that's a really big part of the diagnostic criteria for autism. I've had kids that I've worked with and adults that I've worked with that it's really, really difficult for them to interpret social situations, especially once they get to be an adolescent and a little bit older. Younger than that, they have trouble, but they don't recognize that they have trouble yet. It's a little bit more middle school, high school, where kids tend to start recognizing that maybe they're not picking up on cues, etc. I'm working with a young man right now, an 18-year-old man, who is trying really, really hard and to figure out how to interpret social situations. And this guy's a genius. I mean, he's in gifted classes and everything, and can read off all kinds of history things. As we know, a lot of kids with autism have passions. This guy happens to be United Kingdom. So for instance, he went a whole month with talking in a British accent and eating fish and chips every night. So he's a real character. I love him. But he has a lot of trouble interpreting social situations. It only makes sense because if you think about it, social situations vary widely depending upon very minute changes in circumstances. So what you say with one person might not be the same thing that you want to say with somebody else, which, and then the context, time of day, et cetera, et cetera. So kids on the autism spectrum and adults on the autism spectrum tend to have really, really good rote memory, where if you give them a script, they're there. But if you skew the social context a little bit, it's hard for them to recognize that things have changed. Another example of that is a boy that we worked with in all elementary school. We taught him how to start interaction, and we would talk about, say, a compliment, because a lot of people like to be complimented. So he would always start, he'd say hi to somebody and then say a compliment, and all these well-meaning women are teaching this kid to do this. And then he went to middle school, and he was getting eaten alive because his male peers, he would go up to them and say, "Oh, I really like, your blue shirt. It brings out the blue in your eyes." This poor kid's just getting eaten alive by his peers. So we had to teach him to say, "What's up?" Because that's what you say in middle school. Okay, another common theme with individuals on the autism spectrum is that they misunderstand others' communication or have difficulty expressing themselves. Not only in terms of, communication, speech, but also nonverbal communication, facial expressions, etc. In fact, there's some really cool research where they've looked at eye gaze of little ones, 10 months old, 12 months old, 16 months old, and watched where their eye gaze went when they were watching a video of their caretaker talking to them. And typically developing kids, the eye gaze tends to go to eyes and then mouth. And kids on the spectrum, it tends to be more mouth or just sort of haphazard. So if you think about that, how little ones are learning social situations by picking up on those facial cues, etc., at a very, very young age. If a child isn't doing that, they're losing a whole lot of social nuance that goes on. If you want to look into that, the man that's running with that is named Ami Klin, AMIKLIN. Really interesting stuff. A lot of kids on the spectrum and adults on the spectrum see the world only from their own perspective. I worked quite a few years ago with another teenage boy, and he was, would come in the office, and he went through a phase where, as a lot of our kids do, where he didn't want to take a shower, he didn't want to wash up, he didn't want to brush his teeth, etc. And as a teenage boy, he was getting pretty stinky. And we would come to my office one time, and I said, I got to tell you, it's pretty memorable, your body odor. And he said, "Well, I don't care. I can't smell because I have adenoid problem. I have sinus problems." And I said, "Yeah, but what about friends at school? I mean, doesn't that sort of turn them off?" And he goes, "That's their problem. I can't smell it. I don't care." And then about 2 months later, he comes to my office, clean as can be, smells great, everything's clean. And you think, "Oh, does he have a girlfriend or something?" No, he had his adenoids fixed. So he could smell himself now. And therefore, all of a sudden, he was motivated to work on that hygiene. So a lot of people on the autism spectrum really see very much from their own perspective only. They overreact to minor events. We talked quite a bit about that last week in terms of teaching kids and adults how to prioritize things, decide whether or not something's worth getting upset about. And they might demonstrate increased anxiety over typical daily events, such as minor changes, etc. So it only makes sense that you would, an individual on the autism spectrum, given these characteristics, would make sense that they would have trouble staying calm, etc. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight are some of the most common strategies to teach coping skills. And I'm going to take a little bit of time with each one. But we're going to talk about zones of regulation and relaxation techniques, and the use of visual supports, behavioral reward systems, and then, as I said, cognitive behavior interventions, which is what we spent an awful lot of time talking about last week. So those of you that did come last week, you're going to get a little bit of a rehashing of that, but hopefully it'll be worthwhile. All right, so let's talk about zones of regulation. And some of you already have heard of it probably, because it's a very common system used in school systems, and it's color-coded and helps children and adults identify what mood they're in. So let me give you some examples. And it's really their level of arousal. How alert are they? How worked up are they? And there's blue, green, yellow, and red. And what's nice about the color coding system is it's taking advantage of that visual theme that many children on the autism spectrum and adults on the autism spectrum learn more effectively when information is taken in their eyes rather than their ears. We tend to rely on listening and talking to each other in order to gain information, whereas individuals on the autism spectrum tend to be more visual learners. So having a color-coded system can help these kids and adults on the autism spectrum to be able to remember some of these things. Okay. So just in general, and I'm going to show you a couple of videos to give you a little bit more detail. The blue indicates that you're sort of tired or bored. Green is that you're ready to learn, you're focused, you're happy, you're calm. Yellow is starting to feel frustrated, but maybe, or extra silly, so that arousal level's getting a little bit heightened, maybe a little worried. And then red is where you're out of control and you're, perhaps angry or upset, etc. And that's where we've all lived through it, of kids that can get into these different escalated situations. And that's why, as a behavior analyst, I'm very much in favor of an ABA approach in terms of looking at the antecedents, looking at the consequences. How can we modify antecedents, and how can we modify consequences in order to change the behavior? But teaching the child to be able to identify what level they're at, because of course what you want is you want them to get to start to work on calming down when they get into yellow, rather than already in red. Because once you're there, it's really difficult for anybody to calm down. That's human nature. In fact, at some point, if we have time, I'll show you some examples of what we call a rage cycle, which is basically like a bell curve. And the beginning of the bell curve, we call rumbling. And those are the signs of, the child's starting to get, or the adult's starting to get a little bit revved up. Then when we get up to the top of the bell curve, obviously that's when the individual's in red. And then the other side of the bell curve is what we call recovery. So it's rumbling, rage, recovery. And for each of those stages, we can spell out, and I've done this with parents quite a bit, spell out, okay, during rumbling, these are interventions you want to try. Or if the individual themselves is capable, you could say, when you start to feel this rumbling, these are the coping skills you want to use. And then when you're in recovery, these are the ways to get calm down again. But it's human nature that many of us try to intervene when the child's all the way up here. And keep in mind that, again, human nature, of course, I've never screamed and yelled and, been very upset by things. But if I ever did, I wouldn't be able to think rationally when I'm up at that part. And nobody would be. So that's why it's important to catch the children early, so that they're able to calm down early and be able to use coping skills at that time. Because if they're screaming and yelling and you're going, let me show you this social skill or whatever, or social study, story, it's not going to work very well. So we've got to move you guys so you can see a little bit better. So some of the goals of the zones of regulation include teaching the individual to identify what level they are on using that color-coded system. The goal is to strive to be on green most of the time. We're not trying to teach or turn these kids into robots or whatever, but for all of us, green's sort of a good spot to be at. Teach that individual to identify which strategies work best for him or her to remain on green, because you have to individualize that. And then you get a better understanding of how the individual's behavior impacts others. So the individual can get a little bit beyond that self-absorbed stance that a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum land on, in order to understand that their behavior impacts other people. So these are some pretty serious goals. Some additional ones are to recognize those triggers, which tend to escalate emotions and behaviors. We all have different triggers. Some are more common than others. For me, if the phone is ringing while a text message is coming in, while an email pops up, if I'm getting those multi formats of messages coming in, all wanting me right now, that to me is when I start to feel stressed out. But we all have them. And it's important for kids on the spectrum and adults on the spectrum to recognize what are the triggers that tend to set them off, that in terms of leading to their escalations and their behaviors escalating. And it might be as silly as something as a sound outside that nobody else hears, like a lawnmower going by, but the individual with autism can hear it and it's heightened, and it tends to get them to the point where they're starting to get upset. Or it might be the way somebody says something. I've worked with some kids on the spectrum that love being praised and other ones that can't stand it. So when you say, oh, good for you, or whatever, all of a sudden that might be a trigger to set them off. I have a wonderful video that's very old. I mean, it's a VHS video. So that's how long ago this was. This is a little 5-year-old boy that's now 23 or something that I worked with. But we have a wonderful video of where I'm playing with, or, teaching him one-on-one, and the camera's behind me, and he does really well. And I lean forward and I say, good for you, buddy. And I do like one of these kind of things. And I think I'm just a reinforcing machine. And later I watched the camera, and when I lean forward like this, you could see his face because he was facing the camera and he was going like this. So at the moment, I had no idea why all of a sudden he walked away and didn't want, ran away, frankly, to get away from me. But when I watched that tape, oh gosh, this kid does not like to be touched. What am I doing mauling this poor guy? But on the surface, it seemed like a very reinforcing thing for me to do. You want to also, another goal, and we're going to get into this a little bit later in more detail when we talk about relaxation exercises and techniques, is to identify his or her physiological signs of emotional states. The zones isn't just looking at, it breaks it down into what are your physiological state that you're in, what are your thoughts, et cetera, like we talked about CBI last week. But helping that individual recognize what are those subtle little signs that you're starting to get revved up. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into relaxation exercises. And then identifying nonverbal behaviors which reflect arousal state, facial expressions, body language, etc. Everybody has them. I know that I'm sure I've been married 36 years to the love of my life, greatest guy in the world. And I'm sure he can tell you signs that I'm starting to get revved up or starting to get upset. I know for him, if he stops using contractions, he's starting to get upset or is starting to get stressed. Everybody has those little cues. So when you have identified what those cues, those subtle behavioral cues are for your child on the autism spectrum, make sure that you share those cues with everybody. One of the most classic examples I can always think of you need to be a bit of a detective, is years ago, I worked with a young woman, and she had some pretty serious escalations, behavioral challenges. And we just had so much trouble figuring out what was going on. And she would often say, my teeth hurt, my teeth hurt. And so mom takes her to the dentist, makes sure she's not in pain. Maybe that's what's triggering us, et cetera. And it turned out, as the dentist said, no, everything's fine, is that when she would start to get upset, she would clench her teeth. She would clench her jaw, rather. So her teeth hurt. And that was her way of saying, I'm starting to get anxious. I'm starting to get upset. And we were able to eventually teach her to be able to say, I'm anxious instead of my teeth hurt. It was her way of being able to communicate that. And she had the word anxious before this. It wasn't like it was a brand new word, but she didn't know how to use it in that context. And she, frankly, I don't think understood that she really was anxious in that context. All she knew was that her teeth hurt because she was clenching her jaw. So facial expressions, body language, et cetera. A lot of individuals on the autism spectrum might show increased self-stim behaviors, maybe rocking or hand flapping or whatever, when they're starting to get a little bit more revved up. But everybody has different cues. So you want to be able to individualize that. So now this is the proof of the pudding, whether I'm going to be able to do this or not. Oops, sorry. Now what Lakin taught me is I have to stop sharing. And then I'm going to go back to screens and show you a video. So let me make sure I get the right screen. Hold on. Okay, this is a little video. It's like about a 4-minute video. Just describes the zones of regulation. Here we go.
Boris, today I want to talk to you about the zones of regulation. Some of you might have heard about this before, and for other friends, this might be some new information. There are 4 zones in the zones of regulation. There's the blue zone, the green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone. The zones of regulation are about your level of energy and your feelings. When you have the least amount of energy, you are in the blue zone. And then each zone has more and more energy until you get to the red zone when you have the most energy. The zones also have different feelings in them. If you're in the blue zone, you have the lowest level of energy. You might be sad or sick or tired or bored, and your body will be moving slowly. The blue zone is a great zone to be in around bedtime. The next zone is the green zone. You have a little more energy in the green zone. In the green zone, some feelings you'll have are happy or calm, might be feeling okay, focused. And in the green zone, you're ready to learn. You do your best learning when you're focused in the green zone. This is a great time for reading and doing writing work. That's a great time to be in the green zone. The yellow zone, you have a little more energy. You're feeling kind of wiggly. You might also be frustrated or worried in the yellow zone. Those feelings have a little more energy with them. You might also be feeling silly and wiggly. If you're trying to sit, it might be really hard to sit still. Also in the yellow zone, you start to feel excited. And you lose a little bit of control because your energy is a little bit higher. The yellow zone is a great zone to be in when you're outside riding your bike. You need more energy for that. Then there comes the red zone. In the red zone, you have the most energy. Red zone feelings are really extreme feelings. You might be feeling mad or angry. You also might have mean feelings. You might be terrified. That's really, really scared. And your body might get out of control, and you might be doing some unexpected things like yelling or hitting. And you might be really out of control. We're not in the red zone very often, but sometimes when there's emergencies, our bodies get there, and that's okay. That's when we start to use strategies. Right now, there's a time where a lot of people might be feeling scared and in the red zone, and that's why we use strategies to help calm ourselves down. These are all the zones of regulation. We're going to do some activities with your teachers to help us learn more about the zones. I miss you guys. See you soon.
Okay. Did that give you a little bit of an idea of what those different zones are, etc.? All right. Now I'm going to show you. Sorry, hold on. Another one is deciding it wants to talk to me. It's not what I wanted. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to show you one that's just flesh it out a little bit and kids can watch these tapes so that you can help them understand. So let me do this. And okay, I'm going to show this one, and here it comes.
To the zones of like green zone, blue zone, yellow zone, red zone,
Okay. That was fun, wasn't it? Obviously the teacher had a whole lot of fun making it, but having kids watch that and you can pause and say, okay, which zone do you think they're in? And obviously the t-shirts are a dead giveaway, but being able to help children understand, and you can say, okay, you think they're in yellow? What makes you think they're in yellow? What are they doing that makes you feel like they're in yellow? They're in green? What makes you think that they're in green? Oh, well, they're playing nicely, they're doing their homework, whatever, so helping kids to identify those behaviors that signal each one of those levels of arousal and those levels of energy, then they can obviously do it on their own. And I've also worked with kids where they'll actually tape the children themselves and then watch the tape later and say, okay, where do you think you are here? What zone are you in here? So that they can watch the tape so that they get to the point where they can actually self-identify which zone they're in at any given moment. I have one more zones of regulation video that I want to show you, which is cute. And thought I had it up. Let me do this. Sorry about that, gang. Download it. Okay, here we go. There it is. All right.
Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the zones of regulation. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the zones of regulation. When I'm feeling tired or a little sad too, what color am I? Blue. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the sounds of regulation. When I'm feeling angry, no more to be said. What color am I? Red. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the sounds of regulation. When I'm full of energy and I'm not really mellow, what color am I? Yellow. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the sounds of regulation. When there's joy in my heart and I keep smiling, what color am I? Green. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you excited? Are you mad? Are you anxious? Are you glad? Let's talk about the zones of regulation. All right, here we go. Green, red, yellow, blue. Which color best describes you? Blue, yellow, green, red. Which colors match thoughts in your head? Yellow, blue, red, green. What colors are you feeling in the zones of regulation? In the zones of regulation.
Okay. So did people get a little bit of an idea of what the zones looked like, et cetera? Obviously, there's a whole bunch of different videos and resources, et cetera. There's a book on zones of regulation. There are different visual icons you can use for kids where they actually identify which color they're in by just picking a little square icon of their appropriate color, or the color they're feeling, the level of arousal they're feeling, et cetera. Okay, so let me pull my PowerPoints back. I think we heard that one, buddy. There we go. Okay. Back to my PowerPoints. So when Lakin will, if she hasn't already, she's going to share these PowerPoints with you. So you'll have just these examples of websites for you to look at. Those are the ones I showed you. And then obviously there's going to be some more as well. Alrighty, so now we're going to talk about physiological and behavioral responses to stress, because it's impossible to be stressed out and have a calm body at the same time. So the more you can help the child or an adult with autism to have a calm body, the less they're going to feel stressed. All episodes of heightened emotion include a physiological component. But it's individualized. There are some folks that I used to work with somebody that his hands would sweat when he'd get all nervous, to the point where if he did this, there'd be water coming out of off his palms. Or you have other people that feel tummy ache, or you have other people that get a headache, etc. So identifying those individualized physiological responses for each person is very, very important. And then you teach the individual how to monitor those physiological subtle signs that they're starting to get upset, how to control them, and how to regulate those physiological responses. Let me just say this as far as identifying them and monitoring them. You can't see a tummy ache. You can't see a headache. So sometimes it's very tough, depending upon the level of functioning of the individual that you're working with or that you're living with, for them to really understand that any kind of internal physiological reactions. That's why it's nice when something happens, like the palm sweat or whatever. So it's something you can see. But teaching that child to identify those physiological responses is important. So initial behavioral cues, so there's physiological cues, and then we talked a little bit earlier about behavioral cues. There's subtle behavioral cues. You need to identify those initial behaviors which signal that emotions are starting to escalate. And usually what happens is the adults in the room identify them and start to label them for the child on the autism spectrum. And then eventually the goal obviously is that the child will learn to identify them. So if they start to self-stim a little bit more vigorously, they make, oh, that means I'm starting to get upset, to help them make that connection as much as possible. And once they're identified, then the individual can make sure to activate rational automatic thoughts, which we spent an awful lot of time talking about last week, and simple relaxation techniques. And again, you want to catch them early in order to help them calm down. It's a lot easier to practice relaxation techniques, taking deep breaths, etc., when you're only a little bit escalated rather than very, very escalated. You can also teach the child or adult with autism spectrum disorder to be able to literally exhibit the exact opposite behaviors of the behaviors they do when they're starting to get upset. So for instance, if the hand flapping does increase, teaching them to put their hands, clasp their hands and put it in their lap. If somebody paces, have them sit quietly. If somebody tends to get up and run around. Again, sitting quietly. And the reason for that is because last week we talked a lot about how your thoughts dictate your emotions, which in turn dictate your behaviors. But it goes both ways. Your behaviors can dictate your emotions and your own feelings, in the sense that, and we've all done this, where you're on your way to work and you had an argument with your spouse or whatever, and you get to work, and who does he think he is? You get to work and you go inside and somebody says, hey, how was your weekend? Well, you don't want to share with this person that you're angry. So you say, great, how was yours? And the person says, pretty good. But oh, we did this. Oh, we had a great time. And you fake it, right? And what happens often is, if you show those happy behaviors rather than the angry ones, your brain ends up saying, I thought I was getting upset, but all these behaviors are giving me the cues that I'm not upset anymore. And it sort of helps redirect your thoughts and redirect your feelings. So teaching children and adults with autism to deliberately show there's opposite behaviors will help to sort of give the signal to their brain that they're not going to escalate after all. Some adaptive responses to those emotional upsets, obviously taking deep breaths. We've all done that. And you all know that you're supposed to breathe in your nose and out your mouth. They'll talk about smell the flower, blow out the candle. I've worked with some kids where we literally have a fake flower and a candle, and they practice with those objects in their hand as a way of sort of prompting that ability to take deep breaths. Mindfulness, dependent upon how adept the individual is, quite a few kids and adults that I've worked with really practice that mindfulness, some of the mindfulness themes. In fact, there's a really cool system out there. If you want to look at it, it's just starting to get some real play, called AIM, AIM, and as well as ACT, ACT. If you Google them and autism, it's a mixture of ABA, but also mindfulness. So for instance, I've worked with classrooms where they've incorporated those techniques in the classroom, where they'll do things like have the kids take turns very deliberately eating an M&M, just one bite, a tiny little bite of it at a time. And what's your sensation? I feel the tingling in my mouth. I feel the taste, smells, whatever, to help them focus on the here and now, which I'm sure a lot of you know that's a big theme of mindfulness, is just focusing on the here rather than worrying about the past or the future. You can have the individual remove him or herself from the situation, asking for a break. A lot of times we all do that. And you can take 5 minutes and be a totally different person, counting to, 10 or 20 or 100, whatever needs to be done. If you do teach the child or adult with autism to count, you want to model it first, because what will happen sometimes is the individual count very fast, and you want them to do it at a slower pace as a way of keeping that breathing going slower. And then later go back and evaluate any distorted thoughts once they're calm, strategize about how they can respond more adaptively in the future. But when the escalation's happening, that's not when you teach. You teach before the escalation and you teach after the escalation to get the most effective ideas to get that emotional escalation down. So these are some apps that you can download. And again, they're in the PowerPoints when you get them. I'm not going to show them to you. I just want to describe them to you. MindShift is a nice one. It's based on CBT, which is, again, what we talked a lot about last week in terms of identifying distorted thought patterns and how you want to come up with adaptive thought patterns. And some of the key features are your daily check-ins, where kids will keep track of their thought processes, what's their anxiety level and their mood, maybe on a 1 to 10 scale, things like that. You can set up your own goals or help the child set up the goals, and then they monitor themselves. Because so many of our kids these days are big into electronics, whether it's iPad, iPhone, etc., having it on their iPhone can be appealing just because they get to use the electronics. The old school way is, years ago, I used to have hard copy pages of, on every day, rate yourself, your anxiety 1 to 10, rate your depression 1 to 10, rate, what were your alternative thoughts, etc. Having it all nicely put together on the electronic device is a lot easier. And also the kids can send the data to you. And I've actually graphed data and shown the children to show, look, your average used to be, on a 1 to 10 scale, your average anxiety used to be 8 on average, and now it's down to 3, and showing them that graphic, the graph itself as a way of showing the progress they're making. So you can check that one out. That's free, which is always a good thing. Mindful Powers is another way of teaching coping skills that's got some relaxation aspects to it. It's free as well, which is really good. And it teaches kids how they can respond more effectively to stressful situations through the power of play. It's sort of more of a engaging play kind of activity rather than necessarily a self-monitoring system. And teaching them to zero in on focus time, and being able to focus allows you to stay more calm. And it does have that integration of a lot of the mindfulness theories that a lot of people are pushing for these days, and they tend to be evidence-based. It's nice. The research is backing it up. And then a third one is one that's linked to the zones of regulation. Notice this one costs $9.99 though, but if you're willing to jump in there and spend the big bucks, you can take a lot of those zones theories that we just talked about and the axioms, et cetera, and apply it on a day-to-day basis with kids. And it's also, on different platforms that you can use. Okay. So let's talk about visual supports to teach coping skills. As I said earlier, if of all the sensory modalities, hearing, touch, smell, whatever, the best way to get information into a child's brain is through their eyes when they're on the autism spectrum. That's why a lot of kids and adults on the autism spectrum are really geared towards screen time. Years ago, my son, who's now 32, typically developing, and he went to Cornell. And the reason I bring that up is because right the summer before he went to Cornell, we're at the pediatrician for his last pediatrician checkup, and we're waiting in the waiting room, and there's this Ladies' Home Journal or some magazine, and on the front cover it said, "Does TV cause autism?" So I'm like, oh geez, what now? And I read it, and a Cornell professor had done some research where they looked at the TV subscription per county across multiple states, including Pennsylvania, and looked at the incidence of autism and the incidence of cable subscriptions for TV channels, okay? And lo and behold, the places that had more autism had higher subscription. Where there's a great phrase you always want to think when you look at research is it correlation or causation? If kids with autism are geared towards screen input, and whether it's TV or videos or whatever, that parent's going to dance in place to get that cable subscription because it's going to entertain their child so they can get something else done. It's not the cause of autism, it's a correlation of autism just because kids are drawn to that, to visual things. So I said to my son, when you get up to Cornell, you go up and find this professor and you let him know. He's like, yeah, whatever, Mom. Okay, so bottom line is always, even with higher level kids, you want to make sure that you're providing information and visually and not just relying on gap, 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 like the Peanuts cartoon. So let me give you some ideas on what that might look like. Here's a cue card that a lot of, it's just an example, but I've used similar ones with lots of kids. And you can have positive self-talk statements or remind the individual what they can do to help them cope. So the top one obviously is I feel worried. And then the bottom icons are different things they could do to help them address the being worried. They can tell their teacher, they can point to a symbol, which are different symbols of different coping skills. They can take deep breaths. They can take a break. And they can use the power card, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And they can go to a quiet corner. Those are just examples. For any given person, you would come up with different coping skills that they might find to be effective. But that's a nice little cue card. It's on, it's on the child's desk in the classroom, or it's maybe on the refrigerator in the home, but it's a constant reminder of, okay, I'm starting to get worried. Instead of an adult going, oh, you could take some deep breaths, or you could take a breath, right? It's just a visual cue of the options that are available so that we're not layering on top of somebody that's already starting to feel anxious. Now we're layering on top auditory input, which is one of the hardest things for a lot of kids to process. So now we're going to escalate the situation because we're asking them to do something that's sort of hard, whereas looking at a visual cue is easier. So therefore, they're going to be more adept at calming down. You can do social stories. And if you go to Carol Gray's socialstories.com, she's sort of the guru of social stories. The only thing I want to say about social stories that you need to be careful about, a couple of things. One is that there are books out there where every page is a social story about eating in the cafeteria, a social story about, taking a walk in the neighborhood, a social story about whatever. And people will like make copies of them and then give them to the child. The problem with that is they're not individualized. You're always going to be way more effective, if you create your own social story, because then you can really personalize it for that particular child or adult on the autism spectrum. The other thing I always say about social stories is the phrase is sort of overused. And what I mean by that is there are times where people will say, oh yeah, I use social stories. And I used to say, oh, that's great. And now I say, really? Great. Can I see them? Because they're not always really social stories. What they'll be is a nice visual cue, like, something up in the bathroom of brush your teeth, wash your face, wash your hands, time to go to bed or whatever. There's like sort of visual cues of a schedule, or it might be a visual cue of when I'm in the hallway, I keep my hands to myself and I follow the teacher's lead, and like it's a to-do list. Those aren't social stories. They're very effective visual supports, but they're not social stories. Social stories have these 4 kinds of sentences in them. The first is descriptive sentences, and that means you're just describing the scenario. So let's say it's the child overreacts to a fire drill, and you said the descriptive sentence might be, when I go to school, every once in a while we have a fire drill. So you're just describing the scenario, and that fire drill can be really loud. Perspective sentences is where you insert things in there to help the child understand what other people's perspective is going to be. My mom will feel really happy if I do X, Y, and Z, or my mom might be worried if I do X, Y, and Z. So you're helping the child to take other people's perspective. And then the third type of sentence is directive sentences, and that's more the to-do, sentences in terms of when I feel worried, I could take a deep breath. So you're sort of giving them those directive sentences. And the last type is called affirmative sentences, and those are sort of generic sentences like everybody gets worried sometimes, or the commotion of the fire drill can upset quite a lot of people. So you're sort of normalizing a lot of what the child's feeling. And so I want to give you an example of one, and I would definitely recommend going to Carol Gray's website, and again online you can find all kinds of things that have to do with social stories. But let me show you one that a sample one, and it's very similar to one that I made for a young woman that was hold on. Okay, hold on. She was moving out of her home and she was really anxious about it. So what we did, and these are clip art pictures, but what I did is I took the one I made and I just replaced the pictures and some wording to make it a little bit less obvious in terms of who this person might be. But otherwise, it's a person that frankly is a young lady that shows some really, really serious behavioral challenges, has quite a few skills, but she's 18 and it's time for her, the parents are exhausted and it's time for her to live on her own. And she's got 3 older sisters, all of which are off on their own. And she wants to be like her sisters. So we sort of, emphasize that idea of growing up as part of being on your own. So this was her social story. And again, keep in mind when we made it for this young lady, this would have been a picture of her. When we talk about your sisters, it's photographs of her sisters, etc. So this one's called I'm Growing Up. I'm a young woman now. I'm not a little kid, I think is under there, anymore like my niece Jessie or my nephew Freddie. Part of growing up is moving to my own home. Just like my older sisters moved to their own homes when they grew up. Mom and Dad worked very hard to find a new home for me. I can bring all my favorite things to my new home. These are things that were particularly reinforcing to this particular young woman. Even though I'll live in my own home, I can still visit mom, just like my older sisters do now. I'll get to go to all kinds of fun activities like dances, picnics, and parties. I will get to meet lots of new friends and maybe even have a boyfriend, which was very important to this young woman because her older sisters all were either had boyfriends or married, and she wanted that kind of relationship as well. Very social young lady. That's why we're pushing the social parts of it. And again, social stories need to be individualized. If this was somebody that doesn't like being around other people, it's not something I would emphasize. It's okay to be a little nervous. Remember, those are those kinds of empathizing statements about moving out on my own. Everyone gets a little scared about growing up. But I'll always have my mom, dad, and sisters to help me out. I'm growing up and it's going to be great. Okay, so did everybody sort of see how that social story incorporated those different kinds of sentences? It wasn't like, I'm going to do fine, don't worry about it, but you know, the directive kind of statement. It was more like a story. And that's why you want to individualize as much as possible. And with this young woman, what we did is we started letting her read the story before we knew where she was going, because we wanted her to sort of plant that seed in her head that this is going to probably happen eventually and sort of help her buy into the idea, et cetera. And then actually we updated it once we did know where she was going to live in a group home. We updated it with pictures of the actual group home where she was going and pictures of the staff that she would be working with at that new setting. So by the time she got there, she wasn't as anxious at all. Of course, she missed her mom and stuff like that, but hopefully my daughter did too when she moved out on her own. So that comes with the territory. All right. So let's go back to the PowerPoints. Okay, now we're going to talk about we just did social stories. We're going to talk about power cards, which are a lot of fun. And the book that you see on the bottom of the slide, that's a real book. It's a paperback book. It's not real expensive. I would definitely recommend thinking about buying it because it's just a really nice how-to, step-by-step thing to use. So how power cards work is that you pick something that the child is especially passionate about, whether it's, you know, Thomas the Tank Engine or superheroes, etc., because you want the child to get motivated in learning what's on the power card. And then what you do is you create a little 3x5 card. I'm sorry, first you do an 8.5 by 11 regular size paper of a story that incorporates that passion. And then you take the main points of that story and make a little 3x5 card, which is sort of a cheat sheet. So let me give you some examples. I used to work with a young boy that when I first met him, he was 4 years old. I met him in the house and I diagnosed him as being on the spectrum. And cute kid, lots of language, really neat kid. But while I was trying to get developmental history from the mom, he was sort of in the middle and, Mom, look at this, mom, you know, like holding things up. So I said, is there anything we could help him do that would entertain him so I can get some of this information? She said, oh yeah, we'll put him on the computer. I said, great. So he goes in there and he types weather.com, okay, pulls up the computer and he starts totally immersed in checking out weather because that was his passion. And every once in a while he would run into this room where the mom and I were in and come in and go, partly cloudy. And then he'd walk and he'd run back, or like precipitation and then run back. And I try to engage him to say, hey, partly cloudy, let's go outside. Is it partly cloudy today? And he'd go, and then he'd run back to the computer. So clearly weather was his thing. So we made, once he started kindergarten, and he was in general kindergarten, he was really doing a great job. So he was able to handle kindergarten with some supports with an IEP. And he would have some meltdowns in kindergarten for things like, things that would, any little kid would get upset, but his reaction was over the top, like not being line leader, not getting, what he wanted at the lunch line, things like that. So we made a power card about Joe Calhoun. And you guys are not local. I don't know if you watch WGAL, but he's the weatherman and has been the weatherman on our local here in Lancaster County and central Pennsylvania. And so Joe Calhoun, it turns out, nice little story about how Joe Calhoun is really a good guy because he's okay about not being line leader. And he's okay about, when he gets upset, he takes some deep breaths. So we do this whole thing about Joe Calhoun should only know that he's immortalized. We also made Joe Calhoun tokens. This kid would earn Joe Calhoun's little photographs of Joe with his little bald head and little laminated tokens, and he would earn, 5 Joe Calhouns to get something that he wanted. It was a theme for this kid for sure. He later got into, as he grew older, he got into NASCAR. So we had to sort of modify things. But anyway, so you incorporate those things. I worked with a guy one time that loved the Brady Bunch. So we made a power card, again, that 8.5 by 11 that said, it turns out Marsha Brady looks at people when she talks to them and she says, "Hi, how are you?" And she starts a conversation and she stays on topic. And when it's the conversation's all done, she says, "See you later," and she walks away. So we were teaching him real basic social skills, but with a picture of Marsha Brady on the, this 8.5 by 11, and attributed what we really wanted him to do to Marsha. So we would pull into it. And then we got the 3 by 5 card, got another little picture of Marsha and just a couple of bullets that said eye contact, smile, stay on topic, say, "See you later," that kind of thing. So you can see how taking that passion gets the kid interested. So let's give you some examples. There's some examples, but let me give you some visual examples. So here's one. This is a kid that was really big into fire trucks and firefighting. Fireman Steve really enjoys being a fireman. Sometimes he gets back to the firehouse after a fire and has trouble going to sleep. Oops. He thinks that it might be more fun to stay up and watch television or talk with the other firemen, but he knows he needs his sleep. He knows that it's important to get a good night's sleep so he'll be rested and do a good job when there's another fire. It's important for all future firefighters to learn to get a good night's sleep when they are young. Fireman Steve has learned to do these 3 things when he has trouble going to bed. 1, follow a bedtime routine. Fireman Steve takes a bath, brushes his teeth, and reads for 15 minutes before turning off the light. Number 2, he closes his eyes and tries to lie still. And number 3, he stays in bed after the lights are out. Fireman Steve is proud of young men who get plenty of rest every night. He knows that they will make great firefighters someday. Okay, so you see the theme of, trying to incorporate, obviously, to teach this child to be able to fall asleep easier at night. And then here's the little card that he would have. So follow a bedtime routine. Fireman Steve takes a bath, brushes teeth, reads for 15 minutes before turning off the light. Number 2, close your eyes and try to lie still. Number 3, stay in bed after the lights are out. So it's just a cheat sheet for the child to have. I used to work with a guy that we were trying to get a lot of more adaptive thoughts in his head. And we had little 3 by 5 cards that were laminated that had statements that we wanted him to say to himself. I can stay calm. I can take a deep breath. It's okay if things don't go exactly how I expected. Those kind of, and he was able to read. So he would have a bunch of them on a bungee cord, and just driving the car or whatever, he would go through them. Another example of visual support while I'm on that is a boy that I used to work with that would have these horrible meltdowns if the parents drove in any unexpected way, if they took a different detour home, etc., and it would really melt this kid down for a long time. And so we ended up making a 3 by 5 card in the back of the driver's seat, because he would sit behind the driver, that would say things like, "It's okay if I take a different way home. I'll still get home. I'll be able to play when I get home." Just to have him read those things in order to get those thoughts in his head. But those are examples of power cards. And now we're going to talk about video modeling. And I mentioned this last week, but let me go into it a little bit more. And what you do when you make a video, and if you go online and Google video modeling and autism, you'll find all kinds of neat resources. But basically, video modeling is where you make videos of either the individual or other people that the individual likes, and demonstrating certain coping skills, such as saying self-talk like "I can handle it," engaging in progressive relaxation techniques such as taking breaths, tightening or loosening different muscle groups. I've in the past made tapes of myself when I'm doing therapy with a kid, where I go through different muscle groups where I'm lying on my couch but taping myself saying tightening and loosening different body parts, saying adaptive relaxation kind of coping thoughts to myself out loud, taking deep breaths, things like that, but making it a video that the child then watches instead of me just talking about it and describing it. They just watch the video. which is important to note with video modeling. If you watch the video with your child, you don't talk while you're watching. You don't say, oh, and see how he's taking a deep breath. Oh, and look at that's what something you can do. Shut up. I always kid about that. Visual support for parents and teachers should be just a poster that just says, shut up. Because with us, we tend to rely on, especially women, let's face it, we tend to rely on throwing more words at kids. And I think it's problematic. And when you just want them to watch the video. The only time you get involved is if they start to get distracted, then you tap the screen to reorient them back to watching the video. But you don't do a narrative of what you're watching on the video. You just let the child watch. It can be, video modeling can be effective with all kinds of kids, not just coping skills. It can be targeted on things like self-help. There are a lot of video modeling videos out there of kids learning how to tie their shoe. Or years ago, I used to work with a kid that had trouble using a spoon to eat his cereal, and he loved his TSS. So we videotaped his TSS eating with a spoon out of a bowl, and the kid watched it because he was so drawn to the TSS, and he started eating out of the bowl with a spoon. So years ago, I worked with this girl, a pistol. We used to kid around. She was the mayor. She was like just all over the place, social girl. But anyway, she would take 30 minutes between getting off the bus and coming into the classroom because she would get distracted the whole way down. So what we did is, and she loved to watch herself. She didn't want to watch anybody else. So we actually videotaped her getting off the bus. She knew she was going to do this. And as we're coming off the bus, one person was taking the video and another person was behind the person that was videotaping, doing nonverbal prompts. So they go, walk down the hallway, right? Or then hang up your coat, hang up your backpack. And behind the camera, as this video is going, and we got her to get off the bus to sit in her desk in 5 minutes because of the nonverbal cues going on behind the camera person. And she made that tape, loved that tape, watched it over and over again. And don't you know, it became her norm in the morning that it was a 5-minute trip from the bus. But another one, asking for help, asking for a break, etc. So specific to coping skills, letting them watch things that are where people are demonstrating coping skills would be really good. I worked with a kid, a lot of our kids, quite a few like SpongeBob. And I tell you, I spent an hour trying to find an appropriate response to anger on SpongeBob, and it wasn't happening. So you have to sort of pick and choose where you're going to get that passion, or the passion, the child's passion, to incorporate it as much as possible. But sometimes you just can't, like with the SpongeBob. Okay, now I'm going to show you just a little video. And this video is an example of how to, a video modeling example of learning to take a break for young adults that are working in a day program. So, and again, I'd much rather have any kids or adults, if they know those initial cues are happening and they're starting to get upset, I'd much rather have them ask for a break at the beginning of that rumbling, remember with the bell curve, rather than they're already screaming and yelling. You say, you know what, you need a break. I want that person to ask for a break early. So this is an example of that. So let's see. Where is it? Tell you what, I'll do it this way. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, here it comes.
Ask for.
Okay, you ready? Everybody?
You might need to stop screen sharing, and then the link that
You're
you
right.
pulled up,
Yep, you're right. Thanks.
All
So
these
this is the
steps.
last video, so, okay, screen, okay, here we go. Thanks, Lincoln. All right.
For a break at work. Ask for a break at work.
I need a break. Good work. You can take a break.
I need a break.
Good work. You can take a break.
I need a break.
Good work. You can take a break.
Okay. Did that give you just a little bit of a snippet of what it might look like? If you go online and you find all kinds of video modeling, some of them are a little bit more appealing in terms of graphics and all that kind of stuff. And somebody's talking, sort of setting the stage for what they're about to see. That's fine too. But go ahead and check out video modeling. It can be a really, really wonderful way to teach kids. Okay, and adults. Back to the PowerPoints. All right, so this is where we get back to the cognitive behavior interventions that we started to talk about, or spent all of last Thursday talking about. And because the great majority of you went through this, I'm not going to go into big detail in terms of the background, et cetera, but I do want to just skim through some of the stuff because the slides are virtually the same. I wasn't sure there'd be so much overlap. But just the general themes of CBI, so that those folks that didn't hear about it will have a little bit of an understanding, and then we'll have some time for question and answer. For time's sake, what I want to zero in on is, this idea of most people feel that a situation makes them feel certain emotions, but as we discussed last week, it's actually your thoughts about the situation that determines the emotional responses. So it's situation, thoughts, and emotion. And so part of cognitive behavior interventions and cognitive behavior therapy is to teach an individual to identify those distorted thought patterns that are automatic, that we all get caught up in. It doesn't mean crazy thoughts. It just means maladaptive sort of thoughts that are making you feel a certain way that you don't need to be feeling, and replace them with alternative appropriate behaviors or thoughts. Excuse me. And as I talked about last week, it's really even more complicated. The situation leads to certain thoughts about the situation, which leads to feelings, behavior, and consequences. So we're stretching it out a little bit. And the main theory is to teach children to change the way they think in order to change the way they feel. And as some folks were talking about last week, this is true for all of us, right? I've worked with parents that will get caught up into worrying about what kind of parent they are. If you're not good, I diagnosed a little one, a two and a half year old today, and the mom was very, very. She wasn't surprised because she was actually the one that was saying, I think my child's on the autism spectrum, and but she was kicking herself, going, oh, I thought I did everything right, and I'm like, you did everything right. Let's talk about the research in terms of that. It shows that there's nothing that you did wrong. There's nothing that that you can blame yourself for, et cetera. Let's talk about what some of those potential causes of autism are, et cetera. But her thoughts were getting her going in a direction and of being upset that weren't helpful, because she was really beating herself up. We did this last time. We talked about how your cognitions, behavior, feelings, and physiological effects are all worked up together. And then we went through some common thought patterns to teach our kids, because it's most of the kids with autism spectrum have certain patterns. At least there's some themes that you can see. And so some of the ones that I've most frequently taught include saying change is okay. So teaching kids to respond to changes in the schedule, changes in the different route, like we talked about, changes in the physical environment. Years ago, I worked with a family that they didn't have a whole lot of money, and they saved up their money and they bought a new couch, and they were so excited. And they sent the old couch down to Goodwill, and the daughter was just inconsolable. Still a 6-year-old girl, just, wanted that couch back and was so upset that after a week they went back and got the old couch. They kept the new one for themselves, but they got the old couch and put it in a different part of the house for this girl. Another one with that same girl that was talking about needing to learn that change is okay. The parents lived in a development. And the only way into the development was to pass a McDonald's at the entrance to their development. And the child was very insistent that they had to go through the drive-through before they went home, or otherwise she would literally have a tantrum for hours. So the parents understandably just said, well, we're just going to go through the drive-through regardless of what time it is. And the McDonald's was not a 24/7 McDonald's. So there were many times it was closed. And the parents said, oh, she's going to be upset she doesn't get her French fries. It had nothing to do with the McDonald's food. It had to do with the ritual. So the mom would say, she'd pull up to the first, the thing where you order and say, yes, I'd like some French fries and some, Big Mac, blah, blah, blah. And then she'd pull up and pretend to pay to this empty, dark window. Then she'd pull up and pretend to get the food from the window, and they go home and the child would be fine. And the mom would kid around and say, boy, I'm on some security camera somewhere looking like a complete crazy lady talking to this empty room. But it kept her child from having tantrums. Down the road, obviously, we had to work a lot with her. Another example was I worked with a child that used to have these real sort of oddball days, in the sense that he would leave home in the morning, get on the bus to school, seem perfectly fine, seemed fine on the bus ride. So it wasn't anything on the bus ride that was setting him off. But then the teacher would say, I know the moment he gets off that bus, what kind of day it's going to be from his facial expression. It's either going to be an okay day or he's just going to be miserable all day. And we did all this, ABC, antecedents, behavior, consequence, trying to look for patterns, et cetera, as to what was going on, why is it different? And it turned out that it was a change in routine, in that most days the bus would pull up to the front of the school and let the kids out and they'd walk in. But on rainy days, they'd go to the side of the school where there was an overhang, so the kids could be dropped off and walk into the school without getting wet. And that change in routine just set this kid off for the rest of the day. So we talked to him, taught him to say change is okay, change is okay, change is okay. But also, that wasn't an overnight thing. So in the meantime, we gave him an umbrella, and we dropped him off at the front of the school, and he walked in with the umbrella, and the bus went around and dropped the other kids off. And then we slowly, as he learned to be able to say change is okay and practice relaxation techniques, et cetera, then we got to the point where he could get dropped off with the other kids at the side. Okay. No big deal. Remember, we talked about that last time as far as teaching kids how to prioritize situations using that incredible 5-point scale, which I would definitely recommend going online and looking into that. Anything can be rated on 5 points, whether it's how anxious am I, or how angry am I, or how calm am I. I mean, it could be the positive stuff too. Teaching kids to discriminate little versus big things and what's worth getting upset about. Can't always get what you want. We talked about, the Mick Jagger singing that, and teaching kids to be able to recognize that that just because you can't get it right now doesn't mean it's never going to be available. A lot of kids on the spectrum and adults on the spectrum are here and now. So if you say, no, you can't go to recess right now, or no, you can't have dessert right now, they think it's never coming, and they tend to escalate as a consequence. Teaching them that it's coming, whether it's through picture schedules to show, oh yeah, recess is coming, or first dinner, then, you can do a first then. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that, a first then card, where you have Velcro and you have a picture of first dinner, then dessert, and teach the kids the sequence of those first then sequences so that they're able to know, oh, it's coming. I just need to do X, Y, and Z first. Teaching them. There are a lot of protocols. If you go on Patent's website, they do a lot of waiting protocols and accepting no protocols, because I'm sure you'll agree with this, those of you that have kids on the spectrum, is that if your child could accept no and learn how to wait, life would be a lot easier. I mean, those are two very, very common goals that are on lots of IEPs and on lots of treatment plans for IBHS services in the home, et cetera. But if you Google patent or verbal behavior, waiting protocol, verbal behavior, accepting no protocol, it spells out in really nice step-by-step how to teach kids to stay calm when they have to wait or when they're told no. And the daily schedules we talked about, and the visual supports. I worked with a guy one time that he would ride in a car all day if allowed, and he was a really big, strong guy, nonverbal guy, and he was constantly pulling his mom, who was about half his size, to the garage because he wanted to go for a ride. And the days that she was home alone with him, she went in that car and she drove for hours at a time just to keep him happy. So we ended up doing visual supports of a stop sign of stop and then go, so that he knew that, and that sign was on the door into the garage. So he knew from that sign whether or not it was taking a ride was available or not. Because what all he knew was sometimes I pull up my mom to the garage, and sometimes I don't get a ride, but sometimes I do. So the more I pull on her to get to that garage, the more this might be the chance I'm going to get the ride. Whereas usually those visual supports helped him discriminate that whether something's truly available or not available. Needing to ask for help. We talked about that a little bit last week in terms of teaching kids on the spectrum. It's okay to ask for help, especially the higher level kids when they get to be middle school or high school, or they don't want to stand out. They're worried that they're going to stand out. So they're afraid to ask for help because they think that's going to make them look stupid or whatever. I found with virtual instruction, quite a few kids are having trouble going in the chat room and asking questions to the teacher because they feel like it makes them stand out a little bit more than, say, if they were in class and they raised their hand. Life isn't always fair. Teaching kids to understand that life isn't always fair and everything sort of balances out. Find out what they're thinking. So you're asking for other people's perspectives. Teaching them how to say to themselves, I can try again, so they're not losing ground because they've decided that something went wrong one time, so therefore it's never going to go right. A lot of kids on the spectrum have it in they're very rigid thinkers. So they have it in their mind exactly what's the answer, and they will argue till their last breath that they're right, and just teaching them to be able to let go of that. Another phrase that I've used, and I don't have this on here, but another phrase that I've used to teach kids an adaptive thought to say to themselves was, let go and move on, let go and move on, let go and move on, is a mantra to help them get past something that they're on a bit of a hamster wheel, and then it's hard for them to get off. Let the data be my guide, helping kids look at data. A lot of our kids think black and white, so data helps them get past some of those thought processes that they're getting in trouble with. Think of something good, just redirecting their thoughts to something preferred can be helpful. And teaching them just to say to themselves, solve it, don't dwell on the problem, focus on the problem solving. Teaching them to be social detectives. If you want to look at, if you Google autism and social detective, there's a Michelle Garcia Winner. Check out Michelle Garcia Winner. She's terrific. She's got all kinds of terrific worksheets and books and easy to read, booklets, things like that for parents as well as professionals on teaching social emotional regulation for kids on the spectrum. So Michelle Garcia Winner, check her out. But one of her big things is teaching kids how to be social detectives. And using a thoughts journal as well. All right, so now we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about how to use behavioral interventions to teach coping skills. So if you think of that model we just looked at a minute ago, what we've got is situation, thoughts, feelings, behavior. Well, let's talk about consequences now. And consequences, people think that means negative. No, it could be positive, negative, neutral, whatever. So let's take those behavioral interventions zeroed specifically on consequences. You can set up reward systems, especially when kids are younger or less adept. You know, I worked with a family one time that the child loved M&Ms, and I know that's the, you know, almost stereotypical thing as a reward, but the kid loved M&Ms. He earned M&Ms for toileting and dressed up as an M&M for Halloween that year, etc. And he ended up getting toileted, no problem. He learned how to toilet really well. It increases motivation to demonstrate coping skills in the beginning before the coping skills become more established. You've heard that from me a bunch of times, so hopefully that's sinking in. You may need to start with rewarding gradual approximations to the full coping skill. For instance, prompted responses rather than spontaneous, independent initiation of coping skills. So even if you have to prompt your child, or even if you have to use visual cues, or even if maybe they used to scream and yell for 10 minutes and now they just scream and yell for a minute, that's still progress. So maybe they got reward for that and just slowly up the ante to now you can't scream and yell at all to get the reward. You can have individualized reward systems. Here's an example of, you know, a lot of our kids are into Thomas the Tank Engine. So there's an example of where the child's earning Thomas the Tanks to get a break. And you can have the same kind of thing where they can earn Thomas the Tanks for showing coping skills. You want to fade those reward systems eventually. You don't want the child to be 35 years old earning Thomas the Tank tokens. So what you want to do is slowly increase the bar to earn the reward. It's inflation. So you might have a reward menu where the child's earning things for staying calm and using their coping skills. And the things on the reward menu initially don't cost much at all because you want the child to buy into it. And then slowly the price for each item might go a little bit higher. So your expectations are getting higher, and the reward systems are getting faded that way, because maybe instead of 10 tokens, it now takes 30 tokens to get the reward, and maybe 50 tokens, et cetera. And you slowly go that way. I want to say this, you always want to fade a reward system. Many parents say, oh, he's doing great, we don't need that reward system anymore. No. It slowly, gradually faded away to the point where the child is spontaneously and independently showing those coping skills and staying calm most of the time. And then you can also teach the child or adult on the autism spectrum to self-monitor his or her own behavior and set up their own self-rewards. Sorry about that typo there. So for instance, there you have an example where the child has their own data sheet and I don't like this one, and I apologize for that. I meant to replace it, and I forgot. I'd much rather have this list the appropriate alternative behaviors rather than the negative behaviors you're trying to get rid of. But bottom line is they'd have a little checklist of, they'd self-monitor, did I do these alternative appropriate things? And then they would reward themselves for it. I used to work with a guy that he would start to get upset, and he was in middle school, and he would say what he called irrelevant comments. He would make irrelevant comments while he was in school. And so he would, you know, if he's in math and he's starting to get confused, he's starting to get anxious, he would raise his hand and say, did you see the SpongeBob episode where Squiggly and he's like, go off on this thing, and the math teacher's like, buddy, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about math. And we took baseline data, and this guy, the amount of irrelevant comments that he made varied a lot across his middle school classrooms. So math, like I said, was high, gym was low, you know, reading was in between. So what we actually did is we took that baseline data, and with his, you know, he was part of this decision making, decided what his goals would be. So when we said, say his name was Kyle, and we said, Kyle, look, you on average do 30 irrelevant comments in math every day. What do you think would be a reasonable goal? And he said 20. I said, great, let's go with 20. And then of course we made it 15 and 10, et cetera. We decreased it over time. But initially we went with something that's going to be realistic. And then in gym, look, Kyle, you only make 1 or 2 on average irrelevant comments. What should your goal be in gym? And he said 0. I said, yeah, sounds good to me. So for each class, he had his own goals and he had his own self-monitoring. And initially, of course, we had somebody else collect the data, and he got bonus points if his numbers were the same as somebody else's, so that we made sure he wasn't, you know, skewing the data at all or fudging it a bit. And then what he decided was he liked little Tootsie Roll Pops. There's real little, not Pops, the little Tootsie Rolls. And so he had some in his backpack, and he had total self-control, because what he would do is if he had met the goal in that class, as he was walking from one class to the next, he'd open up his backpack and get one of those little Tootsie Rolls and eat it on his way to the next class. And he got to the point where he was totally independent doing this. So those kind of self-monitoring systems can be really good for helping kids learn how to stay calm on their own. Oh, good. I was hoping we'd have some time for comments and questions. So my final comments before we shut down the PowerPoints is you want to really make sure that you use a mix of strategies for the most comprehensive package. And when teaching coping skills to individuals on the autism spectrum, and obviously you have to come up with multiple coping skills, because you want that child to have a toolbox of skills that they can pick and choose from at any given moment, whatever's easiest for them at that moment in order to stay calm. All right, so let's go back to our general gallery here. So what comments, questions, insights do you all have at this point on anything I talked about across tonight?
So I did get
take the notes. Yeah, I'm sorry, Lakin, go ahead.
I did get a question sent to me. So are the zones of regulation and the color coding system typically implemented in schools, and can that specific form of regulation recognition be implemented in the child's IEP?
Oh yeah, I've seen zones. Well, let me say this, I take it back. IEPs, they're not supposed to say a specific program, whether it's a reading curriculum or a, zones or whatever. They're supposed to say, describe something in general. Because if they, for instance, in a reading curriculum, if they decide a reading curriculum and they designated it specifically in the IEP, and for whatever reason that reading curriculum doesn't work, or they decide another one's better, et cetera, now they're stuck with what's in the IEP. So for zones, they might say a structured, color-coded, coping skills method of teaching the child to do blah, blah, blah. But I've seen zones of regulation used in many, many classrooms. It's very popular in many autistic support classrooms, as well as itinerant autistic support teachers often use it to help kids identify and regulate their sense of energy and arousal. Yeah. And it can be used anywhere. It can be used out in the community. It can be used, it's not just specific to a classroom, home, community, and school.
What coping strategies would you recommend or have seen to be most successful for nonverbal kiddos?
The visual supports as a general rule, and the video modeling rather. I know that, I don't know if the mom's on this week, the mom that last week when we did cognitive behavior interventions, and she was saying her child was nonverbal, and how do you teach a kid to think differently when they don't have those words? That's where those visual supports are so important, and the video modeling is so important. Get the information in their eyes, and hope that it gets incorporated into how they're feeling and thinking at the time. So the visual supports and the video modeling. Like I said, the kid that ate the bowl of, with the spoon from watching the TSS, that guy honestly had some serious intellectual disability as well as autism. This was a kid that was totally nonverbal, pretty, had a lot of gaps in his development, and he was able to watch the video modeling, and within a couple of days, not even a couple of times of watching it, was eating the bowl, eating with a spoon out of the bowl.
So I know that was a lot of information to take in again. Does anyone have any questions or just in general comments or things that you guys have seen?
Hello, I do have a question.
Good.
So I know you were mentioning earlier, and I found it really intriguing about how to kind of teach them that change is okay, which is kind of the antithesis of what we've been told from the very beginning, which is to enforce routine.
Structure, right?
So
exactly.
Now that we're kind of already in that full stick in the same routine mode, how would you best advise us to kind of navigate between showing them that change is okay, but also not overwhelming them and allowing them to keep their routine?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. Because one of the main things that I've taught parents in classrooms a zillion times over the years is you need structure. Because I always say that downtime is your enemy. If there's too much downtime, especially in a classroom, the kid's going to act up because they don't know what to do with their themselves. So you're absolutely right that it's a balance between providing the structure and some predictable schedule to some extent, so that you don't inadvertently trigger some anxiety from the child because every day is a different day and they don't know what's going to happen next, right? That said, life is not that structured. You're on your way home and you hit there's an accident and you have to go a different way home, or you're on your way to the grocery store and all of a sudden you realize you forgot your wallet back, at the house, whatever. That life is not that structured. So it's a really important skill to learn that there are going to be these surprises. So what you want to do is, for instance, if you use a daily schedule, you can have an icon where when they get to that point, it says surprise, and it's just like a fun birthday party icon, something like that. And then you can, when you get to that and you take it off, you go, surprise, popcorn, or whatever the kid really likes. So what you're inserting as a change, right, is something that's really fun for the kid. So they start to do that a lot. So it starts to help them recognize that, hey, it's a change, but that's pretty cool. I got this popcorn, or look, I got to play. My mom had a special toy that she got, Thomas the Tank, that I didn't even know she had, that she bought for me. So you insert change that's especially positive for the child to help them desensitize themselves to the fact that change per se is an issue. And then you start to insert things that are a little bit more reality based, in the sense of, I thought we were going to have chicken nuggets, but we're all out, so we're going to have this instead. But that's okay. Change is okay. And teaching them to say change at that moment is okay. But yeah, I think initially you're going to want to insert change in a very strategic manner, but have the change be something that's fun and a fun surprise. And use the word, I've used the phrase change is okay. I've used the word life is full of surprises, right? And so that way, if you get that surprise icon, sometimes it's popcorn, sometimes, gym got canceled today, or recess got canceled because there's no, because it's raining, or, grandmom's coming to visit, and that means we're not gonna have so much fun because grandma's whatever's going on in your particular home. But you see what I mean? So surprise becomes something that could be fun, or, sometimes it's a little bit more disconcerting.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. It's just associating it with positive experiences, and then just until fading it into almost a neutral kind of experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or even a mildly negative down the road, mildly, oh, you know what? We were going to have like the chicken nuggets, your favorite meal, but I just realized we're out. So we're going to have this thing instead. So, and that's when you teach kids, and just an aside, as far as behavioral stuff, accepting no, waiting. One of the other ones that's really common as a goal is teaching the child to, and it's part of the accepting no, is teaching them to accept an alternative. So what you do, and you guys, parents do this all the time. Oh, you can't have that, but you can have this instead. You're trying to sort of do a bait and switch a little bit. And if the only time you're doing that is when the child really wants this high preferred item, right? You could offer them, $1 zillion, whatever, and it's not going to mean anything because they're zeroed in on that one item. So what you do originally is you say, oh, do you want this liver and onions? Oh, you don't? Okay, you can have this preferred thing instead. So you're sort of switching it, right? And then you eventually get it to the point where it's, because the kid doesn't care anyway, they're being denied that item, but you use the same wording and similar wording, say, nope, that's not available, but this is, so that down the road, after all those trials, they say they want, something high preference, and you say, oh, that's not available, but this is. They've had all those trials of learning to say, that's okay, change is okay, whatever you want them to teach, and to accept that alternative item.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, you bet. What other questions or insights? One of the other, I meant to say, if I said it last week, I don't remember, but there's another neat kid-oriented book called the Copycat series, and it's all about teaching kids how to think more adaptively. So if you go online and you Google copycat and cognitive behavior therapy, it's also a really nice coping, or it's coping, I take it back, coping cat, not copycat, coping cat, because obviously teaching coping skills.
Well, if you guys come up with any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us. We can relay it to Dr. Bruey. And if you guys, I'll come back for our third and final session. She'll be here as well. Again, that one's going to be on surviving puberty, which I'm sure we all need at some point in our life.
And even if your child is young, it might be worth coming just to sort of be prepared for when those hormones kick in. Yeah.
So I used a number generator tonight, and Debbie Witzig, is that how you say it? You're tonight's gift card winner. So we will be emailing you afterwards. We'll probably send it out tomorrow to get your contact information, your mailing address, so that we can go ahead and get that mailed out to you. Also, I wanted to say, about the link, that's what it was. With the link for next week, we will double check it and make sure it's the one that we set up. We just accidentally sent the one for our social group that we have with adults, so it just got mixed up. It ironically just ended with the same numbers, so we didn't really have to double check it. But apparently we did. So I will make sure I get the right link sent out for you guys. Next week, we'll probably send that out like Tuesday or so. So just keep an eye on that. And if you don't hear back by Thursday, please email us and we will make sure it's the right thing. Or if anyone needs it resent because it didn't maybe go through.
Hi, everyone. Just sorry to interject, Lakin. I just wanted to double check and apologize for any of the miscommunication. If you guys have any questions or concerns regarding, always feel free to email me. I'm the one that you always talk back and forth with. I'm just not on the clock right now, but whenever feel free last minute. I'm always checking my email just in case. So always feel free to email me. And if you're confused or got the wrong link, and hopefully it'll be the right